Welcome to So What's It Actually About? I'm your host, Margie Mkechni, and I, along with my wide array of guests, hope to help you better understand and weather the wonderful world of actuarial science. Hello, and welcome to today's episode. We are joined by Nicole. Nicole is an HPCSA, registered industrial and organisational psychologist, and currently she is working as a student support advisor in the actuarial science section at the University of Cape Town. So that's how I met her. Nicole is also my friend. We go on regular mental health walks, which is very helpful. But thank you so much for being with us today.
Awesome. Thanks, Margie. It's so good to be here.
So standard question, give me a bit of background to your sort of career and how you ended up at UCT.
Okay. So I took a bit of a different route the long way around. So initially, when I left school, I had this dream of becoming a journalist.
Okay.
So I went to go and study here at UCT. Okay. Quite a few years ago. And I after graduating, went to go and work, realized this is not really where I want to be. My passion doesn't lie here. I enjoy writing. It's a little bit of a hobby for me. But in terms of a career, I realized it's not right.
Sure.
Yeah. So back to the drawing board at the ripe old age, in inverted commas, of 26. And we decided to go back and study while working full time. So it was a bit of did a bridging course through UNISA in order to qualify to apply for an honours in organisational psychology. And then did my honours through UNISA. And after that, a master's at the University of Pretoria.
Oh.
And then I did a 1-year internship and my board exam. And finally, after 8 years, I became a registered industrial psychologist.
Sure. And tell me, you spoke about journalism being something that you were drawn to. And then where did the draw to organisational psychology come from?
So that's actually it came from a negative experience. Where I was working for a company. I won't mention the name, but there was quite a toxic working environment.
You know who you are.
And it kind of filtered down, right, from leadership all the way down. And there's a really high staff turnover, just a toxic working environment. And it got me thinking, I want to change this. Is there a job that's aligned to educating and training leaders to be better leaders? And that's where I found organizational psychology, and I was like, this excites me.
That's amazing. And then, so tell me, within the context of UCT and the actuarial science department, what is it that you bring? And could you maybe also unpack maybe your prior question to that? What exactly is organizational psychology? I think, it's something that I think people maybe have heard the phrase, but they're just like, oh, it's psychology. Wow, what makes it specifically organizational?
Yeah, so good question. There's a lot of kind of confusion around what do organizational psychologists actually do.
Yeah.
And it's pretty broad. But mainly, kind of a good way I like to explain it is if you look at like a clinical psychologist or counseling psychologist, they deal more with maladaptive behavior, mental health issues, whereas we take a person that's healthy at a point of equilibrium and we help them to be better.
Okay.
Right? So we can, of course, deal with short-term mental health issues, and especially on burnout, depression, anxiety. But we want to take a healthy person and make them even better.
Okay.
That's the best way I can kind of explain it. And also, it's psychology from a workplace perspective, from a careers perspective. So it's in the UCT kind of domain where even now, it's helping students through the education part and preparing them for the workplace, essentially.
Yes, which I think is very important. And maybe I think if you at a school level, you might not necessarily understand that. But especially with something as rigorous as actuarial science, you do need that additional support.
Yeah.
And tell me, does organizational psychology, is that linked to the human resource function within an organization, or do those form separate functions?
Yeah, so actually in an ideal situation, we want to work together. Okay, right? So human resource management is more focused on processes.
Okay.
Whereas we would work nicely together to kind of explain human behavior around implementing these processes in the most efficient way.
Okay.
So we work best together.
Okay. So it's almost like policy and application.
Yeah, very much so. And more of the human elements from an organizational psychology perspective.
Okay. I think that's great context. I think let's now bring it back to the actuarial student.
Yeah.
Our listeners are probably like, what's that to do with actuarial science?
Yeah.
But if I'm a first year UCT actuarial science student, what is the support you can offer me? What is it that I can lean on you for? And why is that something that I should really consider?
Yeah. So the main thing I find with a first year student is the transition from matric into first year university. And there's a lot around adapting into this kind of newfound freedom. Perhaps you've left home and you're now in res and you're dealing with this independence and this freedom, and you kind of think, oh, I've got all this free time, but actually this course is quite, it prevents you from having that free time. So you need to balance that and learn to be accountable.
Yeah.
So I help students with that transition. And then also when it comes to things like fear of failure.
Yeah.
These are students that are, the top performers in the country.
Yeah.
That end up in this program and likely haven't failed anything before.
Yeah.
And now in the actuarial science program, this does happen. And how do we deal with it?
Yeah, it happens a lot.
Yeah. So the first time, it's like kind of like if we're from a dating perspective, the first heartbreak is always the hardest. The first failure is always the hardest.
I liked it. Well, I didn't like it. I know, you know what I mean?
Yes. So I help them with that. And then also with kind of the approach that you take in matric with study techniques are
so different, right?
So different. So I try and say, what worked for you then may not work for you.
Yeah.
And what are some other options that we can explore?
Yeah. So if I know that all our first years have to come and have a consult with you in their first sort of 6 months, 9 months, what is the general sort of interaction that you have with them and the general concerns that they have, not necessarily specific to UCT, just like in general, and how is it that you sort of partner with them in making them cope a bit better?
Yes. So I find there are two main things, and the one is this lack of balance, right? So there's this mentality, I hear it from a lot of students where they've heard from previous students that if you don't work 24/7 around the clock, then you're not going to make it, right?
Yeah.
And that's coupled with this kind of, in general, there's this glamorizing of burnout where it even happens in the workplace.
Yeah.
Where people go, if you're not working after hours and you're not constantly connected, then you're not serious about your career.
Yes.
And that is not the case, right?
But it's not healthy or sustainable.
It's not. It's definitely not. So I'll try and help students to realize that, like an athlete, right, who trains 5 or 6 days a week, they will always have a rest day.
Yes.
And it should be the same with the students.
Yeah.
You should always have a rest day.
And rest is actually part of being productive.
Yes, exactly that.
Yeah.
And it's about helping them to get rid of the guilt. Because there's a lot of guilt around, oh, but I should be working.
Yeah.
But you're actually more efficient if you take
the breaks. Yeah.
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 Yeah. So balance. And then the second thing, which really, it breaks my heart when I hear students talking about kind of this imposter phenomenon.
So yeah, it's like I don't deserve to be here, or
I don't deserve to be here, or I'm kind of waiting to be kicked out.
No.
And it breaks my heart. It's horrible. Yeah, you are so worthy of being here. You are, the percentage of the population that actually get into this program is small. You are amazing. And you do deserve to be here, so own it.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things I like to say to students is if you can find a photograph of yourself when you are, say, a young person like sort of under 10.
Yeah.
And you stick it up at your bathroom mirror or by your cupboard, somewhere where you're going to look every day.
Yeah.
Right? And you look at that photo and you say to yourself, what would I say to that young person?
So,
right? And I would think that you would say, wow, do you know that when you're, 18, 19 years old, you're going to be in one of the top universities in Africa, studying this really, really tough degree.
Yeah.
And I'm so proud of you.
Yeah.
Instead of saying, I'm not worthy, I'm not meant to be, you wouldn't say that to that young person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think something I also just to sort of like double click on that with regard to, I mean, you've spoken about people dealing with failure, having imposter syndrome. What do you do when someone comes and they sit with you and they're like, you know, I failed my first test. I don't deserve to be here. I'm just going to quit. Like, how do you like go about not talking them down, but talking them through? Because I mean, sometimes maybe this isn't the course for you, and I'm not denying that, but how do you go about that?
Yeah, it's really tough, and it's kind of like it's on an individual basis. Yeah. But there's this sense of the only way out is through, right?
Yeah.
And it's not always easy, but there are things that you can do to help you through that process. And sometimes, you know, with AXA as well, there's so many different paths to that end goal.
Yeah, and especially at UCT.
Yeah.
It's a menu of options.
And sometimes you need to get comfortable with being uncomfortable and taking a different route. And sometimes the end goal is still to become an actuary, but doing your board exams externally, or it's switching into something else, and that's also fine, right? There isn't one solution to, you know, where you want to be.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of unpacking where do you see yourself in 5 to 10 years and being open to alternatives. That's sometimes the tricky.
Yeah. I think one of the best pieces of advice I ever got with regard to dealing with failure or quitting was don't quit on a bad day.
Yes.
And I think like it's interesting because I think on a bad day everything just seems so bad, you know. But not every day is bad. I mean, in AXA, then you have your fair share of bad days, but it's difficult to just give yourself some time and be like, oh, actually, it wasn't as bad as I thought it was, you know. But when you're in the midst of it, it's like, it's really bad kind of thing, you know, and to have that bit of perspective, like to always say, will this matter in a year? Will this matter in 2 years? And then realizing, okay, no, actually, I probably won't even remember this failure in a year's time. And I think that it's difficult again, as you say, because you don't deal with failure a lot. I failed my first actuarial science test, and I'll never forget that because I'd done well at school, and you encounter failure and you don't actually know how to deal with it. You don't have the mechanisms to do it. And I think it was strange then when I became a teacher at a school and I would hand out tests and people would inevitably fail. And I remember watching this one student, and he was like 14 and he had failed his test, and sort of seeing him sit there and process his failure. And I was intrigued because I was like, he's better at dealing with failure than I am, and he's half my age. Like, but it's interesting because you get better at failing.
Yes.
Kind of thing, and being okay with it. You know, I think like one thing I always used to do with AXA is I used to be like, it's a fail, but like it's an okay fail. Like it's like an FA fail. Like it's an A+ fail. Like I'm close, but I'm not quite there. But I think just to sort of continue on that sort of thought pathway, you often will deal with sort of people in crisis, right? And they'll come to you and they'll be crying and whatever. How is it that you sort of make sure that you're in a space that you can actually engage with them? And also, I mean, you give advice, but also you can't make decisions for them. So like, how do you sort of manage those relationships? Because people will lean on you, become quite dependent on you at times. Like, how do you sort of manage that?
Yeah, it's really difficult sometimes, right? But I take a coaching perspective, right? Approach rather, whereby it's, here's the information, here are the different options, but you are the only one that can make the decision at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Right? And it's kind of tapping into your strengths and where you want to go. And I'll also kind of talk about, just linking back to what we were saying as well about failure, is about developing this growth mindset.
Yeah.
Where we're looking at failure. Again, I don't like the word failure because it's more like a learning opportunity.
Yeah.
And I like the fact that you shared that you failed something.
Oh my goodness, so many things.
Yeah. Like that. I also like to share that with students. To show my human science. I also struggled with, although I didn't study actuarial science, I struggled with, oh my gosh, this isn't right for me, I need to change something. I didn't get into masters on my first attempt.
Okay.
I like sharing real life stories with students so that, you know, it still turned out all right.
Yeah.
Because they also look at, I think, their lecturers and even tutors, and then they kind of go like, wow, you know, you're on a pedestal and you're